viewers. You are live with Courtside with Lawman,
Hey, Carmen B.
and we are here to talk about issues that impact the criminal justice system.
And a little politics on the side.
Of course, because politics impact the criminal justice system. The
Absolutely.
politicians make the laws, and the laws determine,
What's going to happen to us?
yes,
How it governs how we live.
it determines what's considered legal, what's considered illegal,
Right.
what's considered a crime, what's not a crime, what's considered punishment. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we would like to state if you have questions regarding the criminal justice system, you can call into the show. You can reach us at 916-384-8204. Again, 916-384-8204. You can email your questions to courtsidepodcast@comcast.com, Comcast.net, or you can type your questions or comments in the chat. Our purpose here is to provide information for the public. Now, we would state that the answering of any questions does not establish an attorney-client relationship between myself and any caller or viewer and Mr. Staten, Lawman, or any caller or viewer. But our purpose here is to inform the public. Now, the title of tonight's show is Why We Must Be Engaged in the Political System.
Yes. It would seem that historically that this is something that you wouldn't have to remind any of us to do because of the non-involvement for so many years. And then having the opportunity to be involved.
And when you say non-involvement, you don't mean it was because we didn't want to be involved in the political system.
Because it was illegal to be involved, just like we were 3/5 of a citizen, you see, and things like that.
And then even once it was legal for us to vote, there were blocks that were put in our way for voting.
Taxes.
There was poll taxes, which if you were poor, you could not afford to pay.
Right.
There
Educational test. Things
Yes.
like that, naming all 50 or how many presidents we've had or something like that.
Or if wasn't there a grandfather clause? If your grandfather wasn't there a grandfather clause? If your grandfather had voted, you could vote. Of course, if you had been a slave, your grandfather would not have been able to have voted.
Small things that cut out and eliminate the opportunity for us to participate in the political system.
The system which determines so much about your daily life.
How you live, why you live, where you live, and what kind of jobs and opportunities that you may have.
And we can't wait until, a family member has been charged and then question the laws. We need to be active prior to that so that we have a say in what the laws are.
I think there's some good examples of that, how we passed legislation like 3 strikes, like 10-20 life. And they passed through without huge opposition from the Black community, especially because that's who was going to be hurt by it.
From the community in particular. And so if you are not paying attention to what is happening, not just in your community, in your neck of the woods,
Right.
but what is happening nationally, you may get steamrolled over.
Right.
Your family members may get steamrolled over by some law.
And ignorance of the law is no excuse.
It is not. And that's why we have to be engaged politically.
Correct. Which means that even on a lower level, school boards, judges, people don't understand some judges are elected. Definitely your city council, your county council, your city councilmen, your county councilmen and women.
Your district attorney, your local district attorney is elected. Your sheriff is elected. So it doesn't help us to just complain about those people who are in power if we're not involved in the process and trying to make sure that we get the people that we want in power.
We've seen that in not only the national election, but also the but Senate election in Georgia. We've seen how we, as African Americans throughout this country, have an actual effect on an election.
Yes. So don't think, well, my one single vote really isn't going to matter that much, because your vote may be the vote that matters the most.
And it may be 250 votes that realistically turn the tide. And think about this. If there's 1,000 of us who are sitting around right now and believe they can't vote, and yet they can, we're losing ground in and of ourselves every minute in that situation.
So some of these topics will be things that we have revisited or we've spoken about before. And the reason for that is that these things are of the utmost importance.
Correct. And the danger of losing what we may have had is real. I always joke, Carmen, that, we come from a land, we come from a land of laws, and it was laws that put us in our place, laws that kept us 3/5 of a man, things like that, tell us where we can live, the redlining, all that stuff really dictated our lives for so long.
And at the time, though, it was written in, we had no rights. We had no right to vote.
And now that we can, we're seeing people chip away at the rights that we may have, at least making it difficult for us, and not in an obvious way, but definitely in a way. And it will affect us if we don't see it and then overcome it.
So there was the law, I believe the first one that was passed in Georgia, and there's
right after the election.
Right
Yes.
after the election. And there's some parts of it that are simply ridiculous, such as you can't provide food or water to people who are
Waiting
standing in line waiting to vote. Now we know, hopefully, I haven't had the experience of it being hours and hours,
Right.
but I have had, I want to say it be at least an hour and a half. I think the most for me has been about 2 hours. But I've seen the stories on national news where people are waiting in line to vote for 8 hours. What if you're an elderly person? And what if you have diabetes and you need to eat at certain intervals
Water.
and you forgot to bring sufficient food with you for that?
And notice, we're talking about Georgia. So we're talking about it may be hot. It may be steaming
very
hot
hot
outside while you're waiting. So this it just seems not restrictive, but actually cruel in a way to attack that area. Almost really cruel to say I can't give you water if you're in line, or else, and criminal punishment
for
it. So not just, hey, give me the water, but criminal punishment.
And what is the purpose, the stated purpose behind these laws?
Nothing except voter suppression. That's it. Voter suppression. If you can keep people who want to vote down, then you promote your activities and what you want by blowing up the vote in someone else's yard.
I believe there were also restrictions placed on in terms of mail-in voting.
Yes.
Which, if you're someone who works a low-wage job, you may not be able to afford. You're trying to provide for your family. You may not be able to afford to take the time off from work to go and vote. And so you may say, well, I need to be able to vote by mail.
Right.
And they realize that, and they are trying to restrict it. That is the purpose of these laws. If we can prevent these people from voting, then our candidates, and by our candidates, I mean their candidates, will win.
Yes. And, I was talking on a radio show a while back, and we were talking about this kind of thing where we really have to wake up and see what's coming at us, feel what's coming at us before it gets there, to know how to react to it. And I think that's an old martial arts type of principle, is to be able to play defense, because the best defense is a good offense. And in football, defense wins Super Bowls and things like that. So really, we're on the defense when this stuff happens. We're not trying to create bills and laws ourselves.
Proactively.
Right. We're just trying to defend ourselves from being beaten by these laws. And beaten meaning suppressed, our votes, our power suppressed. So that, and part of it is us, and it is us. We have to become aware. That's the thing. And that's our purpose.
We have to see that this is what is trying to be done.
Yes. Every day.
And how else can we see the political effect in the criminal justice system? Let's talk about the fact that how many judges or justices was Trump able to put onto the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land.
Serve for life.
How many justices?
At least 3, right?
3.
Yeah, 3.
3.
Out of 9.
And what are we seeing now? The impact of that.
Right.
Well, let's talk about it, Keith.
Yes.
What?
Well, the first one is we got to talk about juveniles and the ability of juveniles to avoid what's called an LWOP sentence, life without the opportunity of parole.
Life without the possibility of parole, meaning that someone who is young, when their mind was not properly formed, and who may have engaged in some criminal conduct that resulted in the death of someone, that person never be allowed to live a free life again.
Correct. And you got to put this on a scale, right? A lot of things and a lot of people do acts that cause death. We know that there's a huge range from an involuntary manslaughter. We call it a voluntary manslaughter. We would call it murder second, murder first. But in all these situations, someone did something and it led to death. Now, for LWOP, believe it or not, if you were engaged in a felony, and this is before 1437, and I don't know what's going to happen here. At least our laws here hasn't changed. We're talking about in Mississippi, the Supreme Court has overturned cases that have come up out of other states. So we got to feel like it's going to affect us because it is the Supreme Court. But if, in fact, you were engaged in a felony and someone died as a result of that conduct, it used to be regardless of your participation in bringing about the death, you would get LWOP.
That was called the felony murder rule.
Felony murder rule. Now,
here is the thing. Although it has been changed in California,
yes,
it has not been changed throughout the other states.
Right.
Now, there may be other states, I think, that are moving in that direction. There may be a couple that have also passed some laws to that effect. But overall, that is still the law in the majority of states.
Correct. And still, if you, even in California now, if you're a major participant or a substantial participant in bringing about the death, then you also can get life without the opportunity or possibility of parole.
And that felony murder means you don't have to be in the states where that is still the law, or the cases where you are considered a major participant. You don't have to be the person who actually did the killing.
Right. And that's why we have adjusted it here. Because I think for so long we realize you have these cases where a person's not even present at the time that their co-defendants may have killed someone, or you did.
They're present, but they had no idea that the co-defendant had a gun, that he was going to use that gun when they agreed to participate in the crime. And so we think that is part of the reason there were so many young lives that were thrown away as a result of that felony murder rule. And now California has moved in the right direction regarding that. We can't say that children belong in prison for the rest of their lives when we know scientifically that children's minds are still forming and not fully formed. Now, the case that the Supreme Court was hearing, the facts of that involved a young man, I believe, like you said, the case was out of Mississippi.
Jones versus Mississippi.
Yes. And I believe it was a young man, Brett Jones, who at the time of the incident, which happened, I believe, in 2004, when he was 15 years old, he was engaged in an argument with his grandfather. And during the course of that argument, he ended up stabbing his grandfather, which resulted in his grandfather's death. But he was a 15-year-old kid when that occurred.
Now, those facts alone, think about this. You're in an argument. You don't know what's said. I don't care what's said. But one person kills another in the heat of that argument. To me, that sounds like voluntary manslaughter. That sounds like, if anything, second-degree murder. But definitely not first-degree murder.
And again, it is Mississippi, and I
Yeah.
don't, Mississippi
Right, we gotta
laws
go by-
are different, so we don't know. I don't know.
Right, what
Haven't
their
researched the
statutes really
specific
are.
elements of the crime in Mississippi. But kids act irrationally, right? We know this. We know that kids sometimes don't make good decisions because their brains are not fully formed and they haven't had the life experiences that an adult has had
Right.
that would help them in making
Decisions.
the right
Oh,
choices.
gosh, yes.
They are also more likely to be influenced by peer pressure.
Yes.
This new ruling of the United States Supreme Court in Jones v. Mississippi basically states that the judge does not need to do a separate factual finding of permanent incorrigibility before sentencing a juvenile to life without parole, meaning that child is going to spend the rest of their natural life behind bars. Now, we are not saying that there is no value to the life that was taken. We certainly recognize that.
Right.
But we think that as a civil society, we can't, as a civil society, be putting children in prison for the rest of their lives.
There's something to be said for civility. There's something to be said for justice. It's the punishment really fitting the crime. The felony murder rule was, and I'll tell you something, it doesn't have to be you pull out a gun and shoot anyone. I mean, I could have a heart attack in the middle of the robbery, and if that heart attack was caused because of the robbery, it can be the felony murder rule. So here, I mean, murder is murder. I mean, you have killed a human being, and the way we measure it is what kind of malice you had before that killing. Did you have a conscious disregard for human life and then take it? Serial killers, people who we call serial killers, those who kill over and over again, and it is fun for them. Those who walk into places and shoot everyone there, attempting to kill everyone there in a kill zone. Those individuals, if you want to save the LWOP for someone, you save it for them, because you clearly have people who have a conscious disregard for human life, and they should not be on the street again. But an argument or a crime and a juvenile goes to prison for the rest of their life, and you compare it to some other act where someone's serving 25 to life, it's hard to make a rational connection that that's the proper punishment for the crime.
And in the court doing this, I bring up the fact that there are 3 justices that were placed on that court by Trump, because this is showing you how the court is turning.
Yes.
Previously, the court had decided, and I don't have the cite for that case, but it was involving a kid by the name of Miller. And when the Supreme Court reviewed that case, do you remember what year that was, Lawman?
His was 2000. It was 2004 or 5 too, I thought, by the time
that might have been when it happened, but when the Supreme Court issued the ruling, and they actually at that time had banned mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles, saying that basically that was cruel and unusual punishment, and that judges and juries should consider the special factors of youth.
Correct.
And that gave many inmates across the country who went to prison as children the opportunity at life again. And now what we're seeing is that tide is turning. And this now conservative court that we have is saying, no, it is fine to sentence these children to life without the possibility of parole. We do have some comments in the chat. We have Borikai, who indicated she saw that ruling this week, and now she understands what that means. I see a sheepdog protector. What was that called when the 16-year-old
stole beer from the
Walmart, ran over 4 people on the side of the road, and had a naked 14-year-old girl in truck, and his friend in the back of the truck also ran out. I don't know specifically what case you're referring to, If you know that, if you could let us know, because if we have a name, sometimes we can look it up that way. But there's so many cases that happen. And to give you an example, we can talk about the case some years ago where the young man was found to have what was it? He was too rich to realize. He was too rich to realize.
He suffered from
affluenza. Yeah, he was too rich to realize that his conduct was wrong. And if I remember correctly, he had driven while under the influence and actually killed a number of people, more than 2, I believe.
I think it was.
Yeah, more than 2. And I believe he was given probation.
Yes.
So that's what we like to refer to as white privilege.
Justice gone wrong. And in fact, the Miller guy that we were just talking about, he was 14 at the time in 2003. And
when his case actually happened.
He beat a guy and he set fire to the trailer. And so...
but he was 14 years old when that occurred.
And his was overturned as cruel and unusual punishment.
And so he was... it not only was his, but that's when the court indicated that it was cruel and unusual to sentence juveniles in that way. Right. Well, his case has come back for sentencing as well. Right. And the court, I believe, in light of his sentencing court, in light of the new ruling by the Supreme Court, resentenced him to life in prison. Yeah. Now, I do believe, and I would like to just state that Mr. Miller was a white juvenile.
Yes.
But we still don't think that a juvenile, whether that juvenile is white or African American, should be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And even though Mr. Miller was white, we would note that the majority of people who were sentenced under these laws are African Americans and other people of color in disproportionate numbers to our percentage of the population.
Correct.
So we can't say, well, we don't care about Mr. Miller because he's a white juvenile, because that is not true. We care about Mr. Miller just as well. But we point out the fact that it applies more often to African Americans.
And that's a decision made by prosecution.
It is.
How it gets to that point.
Which brings us back to why it is important to be politically engaged.
Right.
If there is a district attorney in office who is making those decisions, and that's not someone that you voted for, or you didn't vote at all, because maybe your vote could have stopped that person from being the person in office who is making discriminatory decisions about who to file.
And what to file on them.
Yes.
I mean, thank goodness for what we have here, Prop 57.
In California.
And 1391, AB 1391. Prop 57 said it took the direct file ability away from the district attorney, which means a district attorney, child under 16 even, can be directly filed into adult court. You never see juvie court.
That is how it used to be. So you could have someone who is a kid, and I believe 14, it was 14. 14 or older, you could be filed upon as an adult.
From the jump, from the first jump.
We have another comment from Sheepdog Protector indicating Trump appointed 234 judges.
Federal judges.
Yes, when we were speaking, that number may be correct. We were speaking specifically, though, about the highest court in the land.
Correct.
The court that determines constitutional law that impacts all of the states.
Right. In fact, it governs our morality. And that's one of the things we got to look at is our morality. Do we want to be a civilized society who jails and put kids in prison for life? And it's just something we have to answer. You can imagine how many citizens would answer saying, well, as long as those bad kids are off the street, I'm fine. We should do that. And they would tell you that, well, we got to show those kids that killing is wrong, that, taking a life is wrong. We have to show them that. But if you think about it, that was the reason behind the death penalty, was to try to show people that, hey, you would be punished with death if you kill. But
why doesn't that work?
Well,
why doesn't that work? Explain to the people why that kind of rationale does not work when it comes to these types of cases.
First, it's not logical, okay? Because I am not thinking about the penalty when the acts occur. And I don't believe anyone is stopping to think about the penalty when the acts occur. Sometimes I don't know, and if I'm going to go kill, I don't know and take, just say, stock of, well, how many murders occurred, or how many people got the death penalty, when they murdered, right? Because there's so many kinds of murder. And the death penalty is, once again, the decision of the DA's office. All it has to be is a capital crime, which means a first-degree murder, and you can go after death. So the district attorney's office makes that decision of whether to go after death, just like they do for the direct file, but we've changed that with Proposition 57. Proposition 1381. Now, 15-year-olds cannot be charged as adults. So you will never get into the prison system. You can go to CJJ until you're 25 or 23 years old, but you will not be prosecuted in the adult system.
At what age?
At 15.
15 or
and
under.
15 and under. So, and that's even for murder. That's for murder, attempted murder, anything.
So 16 and older.
16 and older, you face the danger. Still.
But the decision now is up to a judge, whereas previously it was up to the district attorney.
And we say that, and then how it relates to politics is because the district attorney is elected. It's a position that we vote on. I can tell you, and we'll probably talk about it later on, but it's going to be very important that we all get out and vote in the district attorney election this year.
Not this year.
I'm sorry.
2022.
Yes. But anytime there is an election, we have to get out and vote. We've got to learn what's going on and get out and vote. So you see how the problem we have is we vote for presidents, and the presidents put people on the Supreme Court. We vote for district attorneys, and the district attorneys decide how to prosecute and the philosophy of their office in terms of going after death, life without, charging juveniles. All the way down to your city council people who decide how the police enforce the laws, where they go to enforce the laws. So, and just like on the county side, the sheriff's office. A sheriff is an elected official. And that
even though some sheriffs act like they are not elected officials and that they don't have to respond to the people.
But they do. And it's only when their power gets so large that you can't stop them that we start seeing devastating things in terms of their policies and how they police. Because, we're talking now all the time about policing and how we should police and what we should do in terms of policing. There are places in the country right now, I know Camden, New Jersey is one, where they decided to rethink the idea of policing. And that's what it's really going to take. People say defund, do this, throw out key buzzwords, but all that really matters is we got to rethink how we want police to operate in our community. They are individuals who we put there. They work for us as citizens. That's their primary duty, is to protect citizens. So we have to dictate how we want them to operate. One of our failed things that we do in this country, one of our worst nightmares is how we treat individuals with mental illness. We have shifted them from mental hospitals into the criminal justice system. They clog it up, and there's nothing you can really do about it at this point.
Because they need treatment.
Right.
And if you take someone who has a mental issue and just place them in a jail, they're not going to get better. They're not going to be able to follow your directions. And they're just going to go further down into the descent of mental illness. Jails are not the place for people who are mentally ill.
Correct.
Treatment is. So just like we are doing all of this treatment right now for the opioid epidemic, we need to do treatment for people that are mentally ill. Now, in Sacramento County, I will say that we do have
mental health,
mental health court,
diversion court, and mental health diversion and mental health court.
Yes.
Yes.
So Sacramento County is at the forefront of trying to get more treatment for people who have mental health illnesses. And I believe Judge Brown is still running that department and is doing, I would say, a wonderful job.
He really has. I mean, and I mean, it's personal to him, to tell you the truth. And you can see stories on the web about it, why it's personal to him. But I've been through that court. I've walked through that court. I've seen what happens there. And I'll tell you that the public defenders and the district attorneys who run that court or who are in that court are pretty much dedicated to trying to help individuals. And you've got to qualify, and you qualify basically by getting a crime, by being charged with a crime. And then they have to see whether or not you're suited for it, meaning, are there resources available for you? Are you a person who has been diagnosed and you just off your medications, you just off your program? Because what they really try to do is get you back onto that program. They try to get you to understand your own illness and how you have to control yourself. And of course, individuals self-medicate. So drugs are usually an issue.
It can be.
Yeah. And when they don't take their own medication, which I can understand that because it makes them feel differently, that now they cannot control their emotions. They cannot control their actions. And when they get to that point, it's really hard to pull people back. It really, really hard. So we're dedicated, at least in the court system, to help people who are mentally ill. But what it's really going to take is on the state level. We have to reinstitute more state hospitals, even not as large as Pascadero or Napa, not as large, but at least smaller facilities.
And really, if there could be more outpatient care for people with mental health issues, because what we don't want to do is just, okay, we're going to throw you away because you have mental health issues, lock you away in some big hospital and never have to see you or worry about you again.
The regional is out there as one agency that does help those who are developmentally disabled.
Yeah, developmentally disabled, which is a little different. Sometimes you have someone who is both, developmentally disabled and also mentally disabled, but Alta Regional focuses on people here in Sacramento County who are developmentally disabled, meaning they were born with some type of physical or mental defect.
And they do a good job. I have to say, when they really care for their clients, they really, really come out for them. They're in court. They do an analysis. They're doing that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And it's good to see.
And their purpose is to try and help people who have developmental issues to live independently. So they teach them some of the things that that maybe you would have learned from your parents. It's going to take someone who has developmental issues a little bit longer to get those lessons, but they can still get them.
That's true. I mean, I've had experience with that, with clients and stuff. And you see, when Alta Regional comes out for you, it's really a good thing. They really make your job easier because they're going to do the assessment and the evaluation, and they're going to do the training. So we tend to be judged. You can judge a society, they say, by your lowest ranked person, how
that society treats the people at the lowest socioeconomic level and the most vulnerable,
like our elderly, our youth, are mentally ill. And if we fail in those departments, how do we call ourselves a civilized, moral society?
Now, I also want to bring up, when we're talking again about politics, and we're talking about, in addition to the district attorney election in 2022, I believe we will also be voting for sheriff in 2022. And so it's important because the sheriff then hires the deputies. Right? You want a sheriff who, if one of his deputies is engaged in illegal conduct, that sheriff is not afraid to fire that deputy. For example, the deputy that was in Florida, and I think this just came to light, who was planting evidence on people,
A lot of it.
A lot
years,
of it
right?
over years
Yeah.
and years. His misconduct, I believe, came into light in 2018, and in 2019, I believe he was indicted on a total of 52 counts of charges, including racketeering, official misconduct, perjury, fabricating evidence, false imprisonment, and possession of drugs. Those charges stem from his arrest of about 11 different people, but they are investigating, I believe, over 200 plus cases that he was involved in. I believe there was actually a traffic stop he was so brazen. He was doing this despite the fact that he had on a body camera that was capturing him planting the evidence. But he was counting on the fact that nobody was ever going to review those body cameras. And that's why we tell our clients, if there was a body camera, we will get that body camera footage. And you know what the body camera footage shows. Share that with us so that we know, and then we can get that footage and use it to your defense.
Correct. And when we talk about the body cams, once again, something that had to persuade law enforcement to try to wear, and we see that along with independent cell phone footage has been remarkable, has been a godsend in terms of being able to look at situations from a different light and prosecute if necessary.
And to prevent, now just imagine this, the time period when there were absolutely no body cameras. And it was your word versus the cop's word as to whether or not you had done something or how something had transpired.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely. Because what we even see is that when officers have used the body cam, they will use different language, to tell a different story, even though the body cam shows the facts. So
one of the favorite things that they will do is if they are detaining someone to yell out, stop resisting, stop resisting. Now, the purpose of that is so that if there are bystanders listening, that hearing those words paints a picture in their mind that the person was resisting, even though the person may not have been resisting.
Right. And I'll tell you something about resisting. If a person grabs your hand and jerks it behind your back, there are some impulses that happen in your body, especially if you're on the ground and people are on you and on top of you. Your body will do a natural
resistance to pain.
Yes, exactly.
So you're not resisting the officer, but if the officer is on top of you and is twisting your arm or twisting your wrist, right, you're going to move in response to that. So the person who is watching and can't fully see what is going on between you and that officer is just seeing that you are twisting and the officer is yelling, stop resisting.
Right. And that has been, you got to figure that's a learned behavior on their part. They've learned that if we say that at that particular time while we're hitting somebody up, that's what will be in the record, so to speak, is that, well, we told him to stop resisting. Therefore, whether he was resisting or not, we told him to stop.
We have a comment from Warren Mack, 73-year-old Karen Garner with dementia. The police broke her arm arresting her. And I believe I'm going to apologize to Mr. Mack because I believe that he did send that article to me, and I just can't find it at this moment, but I did read it. She had dementia.
Yeah.
They detained her. How they actually uncovered what the officers had done is the officers were actually watching their body camera, apparently for entertainment, and they thought that it was hilarious that they heard her arm pop when they broke her arm.
And even made a comment, something like, God, I never thought I'd have to shove down a 73-year-old woman or something like that.
Yes.
There's a similar issue that happened recently with a gentleman who was autistic, and actually the Vacaville cops and an autistic child who was roughed up because of being autistic, and they claim, well, we didn't know he was autistic. And that's a good excuse, I guess, but still, how we how we treat the people who are the most vulnerable in our society is what we should be measured by, and it's just wrong that we can't have compassion for them. I mean, here we had the elderly woman. I mean, uh,
And if I remember, I'm trying to
I'll
remember
find it.
if
Here
I
it is.
actually
They
saw
laughed
the
at
video.
her. Yeah, it's
And she may have actually been a white woman.
Yep.
So if they're doing that to a
Yes.
white woman, can you imagine what they're doing to African American women that they stop? And I think
Yep.
that brings us to there was a grandmother who was, I believe, on her way to a funeral, and she
yeah.
was speeding.
That's
She was speeding, and when the officers stopped her,
Yeah.
they end up pulling her out of the car.
Yep.
Maybe was it even by her hair?
Yes,
I think
it was.
she was a
Yes.
66-year-old African American woman.
Yeah.
So what we see is these officers just acting in very, very aggressive ways.
Right.
And we need to take back that power. And by take back that power, we are not saying, Lawman
Right.
and I are not saying defund the police. We
Right.
realize as a civilized society, you do need a police force. But that police force must realize and must be accountable to the people,
they
the
serve. Yes.
voters, the people. Even though you don't vote for officers, you vote for the sheriff,
leaders,
right?
Yes.
They have to realize and they have to be accountable to the people. And the way that can occur is, again, this brings us back to why we need to be engaged politically. We want to get laws passed that remove some of these protections for officers. So now we can apply that same logic. If the officer realizes that he will be held accountable for his actions,
Right.
maybe he will think twice
Right.
about behaving in these extremely aggressive ways in situations where it is not called for.
Yeah.
And Mr. Mack confirmed that the 73-year-old
Yes.
woman with dementia
Right.
was a white woman,
Yeah.
that they mistreated in that particular way.
Correct. And in Vacaville, I just had pulled it up. It was a white teenager who Vacaville police pretty much, I mean, the video will show that the teenager had done something. Someone had reported that the teenager, let's see, he was outside, he was playing. Oh, okay. He tried to apparently pick a fight or something, they thought, with someone else. No, people were teasing him. That's right. People were, yeah, he had autism and people were teasing him.
And he picked
up something to kind of work them away. And he went about his way, and he was, nearly home, but by himself and away from that. And people had called the cops because someone said that he had stabbed somebody. So that was the call out. And then the cops.
But there was no stabbing.
No, there was.
There was or was not?
There was not.
Was not.
And so the officers running it right now, but it's interesting because the boy was literally in his neighborhood and just standing on the sidewalk when the officers ran up, figured he was the suspect, and really just grabbed him, threw him down,
into the ground.
Him. Yeah.
One thing that we also need, and again, this can be dealt with training, although I will, because I believe Borkai had made this comment before, that we can't train the white supremacy out of someone who is on the force. And that is so true. But for those who are not white supremacists, what we can do with training is teach them that not every person that they encounter is the same. Not every, that they have to be aware that they're going to be people that they encounter who suffer from mental illness, who suffer from developmental disabilities, who have autism, or who have what's that where they're not quite on the spectrum. I can't right now think of the diagnosis, and I believe Elijah McCain suffered from that, where they're kind of people that are very introverted. And that brings me to, I don't know if you saw this, Lawman, but there was a video that was on the internet of a young employee. I want to say maybe he was 20, 21 years old, that worked at a hotel, and a customer, there apparently had been some discrepancy with a customer, and the customer was discussing the issue with this young man, and the young man had a breakdown. This was a white young man. He had a breakdown, and whatever, I believe he stated he had some kind of mental diagnosis, and he actually started hitting his computer. He hit himself numerous times. He hit his head into his computer screen. He then walked away, and the customer was filming all of this. When he walked away, he began crying, just wailing uncontrollably, right? And that was published on the internet, and someone established a GoFundMe for that young man. And within a matter of hours, certainly less than a few days, there had been $100,000 in donations to that young man. And I'm very glad that people opened up their hearts and saw that. We need that same kind of sympathy when something like that happens to an African American person.
Correct. And I think they're still on an autism scale, but just on a low level, functioning.
Yes.
They
but we need officers to recognize that sometimes when a person isn't responding to you, it is not because the person is being disrespectful.
Exactly.
It's because they have a medical diagnosis for a condition.
There was a time, I think it was Florida, but I saw it being replayed again on the web, where the worker, he was the worker for developmentally disabled boy, and the boy was in the middle of the street, and the worker was sort of holding the boy, and someone had called the cops, and the cops were there, and they I don't know why they thought there was a gun or anything involved, but
they shot
the worker.
Yeah.
So
he was like
the worker was the black guy.
He was a caretaker for the developmentally disabled
and one cop came in, a young rookie, and I mean the other cops were there, but he came in and shot the worker.
And again, that brings us to this automatic assumption of criminality when you see brown skin.
It's true. And back to those elections, see, when all of this stuff, it falls under who we put in power. It falls under that. If we put you in power and you do these things, and I would say, I'll call it abuse society. And because we put you in power, then we've got to recognize, then we got to take you out of power. And we can do such things. And it's all about participating in every election, getting out the word to vote in every election prior to the election.
Because these people that are getting, these politicians are the ones that are making the laws that will determine what the punishment is going to be if your son is accused of some crime. The laws that will determine whether or not the district attorney decides to file a case as a misdemeanor or a felony.
Correct. And whether to treat your case as I'm a drug recovery, veterans recovery, mental illness recovery, things like that. I mean, in a society, it is so Asperger. Yeah. In a society, we have to look at there are individuals who need our help constantly, and I think it was Hitler and others, fascists, things like that, who run countries, who feel that those individuals are not worth anything, and they're ready to sacrifice them at all costs. And when we're not out shooting them down, we're not hurting them into places, but when we do not respect the fact that they suffer from something mentally, then we are also failing at that too. And we're like that. We would turn our back to them. We're not helping them. And so that's where I think we fail, especially as African Americans in this country. If we don't watch out for things like that, there's that, they'll come for you in the morning,
That is it.
I don't have autism, so I didn't care.
I want to note for the other callers, in case they didn't see it in the chat, the condition that I couldn't think of was Asperger's.
Yes.
Yes, that was that condition.
Right, which it's hard to detect right away.
It is.
It really is.
It is.
Yes, but the child is really to themselves.
They're very introverted.
Yes.
And in fact, we had an esteemed member of our legal profession who suffered from that condition. And if you didn't know it, once you got to know him, you thought that there were some things that were odd in how he communicated. But once you knew the diagnosis, it explained everything.
Right. So on that thing, I mean, the voting, right? The political process. Note that it starts local and it goes national.
Yes.
And the national can be affected by your vote, just like the local.
But in addition to voting, and I think we spoke about this before, is that when there are bills that are in committee, you can contact your legislator and let them know that you support that bill.
Yeah.
Or that you're opposed to a particular bill.
We've seen that when the pictures for Mr. Brown, when Mr. Brown, they had the press conference that morning. And once again, back to the laws, right? Laws
You're talking
regarding
about Mr. Brown,
yes,
the shooting?
The shooting,
yes.
Yes. One of the big issues was, should body cams be released right away? And which is something that, the people could demand. And here, our police chief agrees to do that. But there, they were hiding behind, the law of, do I release it or not?
Our chief doesn't release them immediately. It took a substantial amount of time before they released the shooting in the Stephon Clark case. It was not immediate.
Substantial, but
well, here's what we know. We know that they can release it immediately. How do we know that? Because in the Mackay case of the young girl, where they felt they were justified in shooting her because she had a knife, it got released in what? Less than a day?
Sure. Now,
so if you can release it in the instances where you think the officer's conduct is justified, you can release it in the instances where his conduct may be questionable. We as a public need that transparency. And we have to demand that transparency.
But you're right in historically, Laquan, McDonald, a lot of the older ones, the McLean guy, this footage didn't come out for a year, and it's coming out now because of the pressure that people are putting on individuals to get rid of it right away, or at least not rid of it, but, to at least expose it.
To release it to the public and let us see what the body cam shows, so that we're not relying just on the officer's version of what happened. Because what we have discovered time and time again is that the body cam does not match what the officer said about what happened. Bringing us back to the old woman, I shouldn't say old woman, but the 73-year-old woman who was pushed down. Now, how they had described what happened in their reports, I believe, was substantially different from what that body cam showed.
And we see it happening all the time now. There's a little difference of opinion. I mean, do you remember the case here with the Sacramento Police Department officer, our boy Donato, had the case where this was a DUI, and the camera showed that the field sobriety test and things were not done as he had described in his report.
So he claimed that he had given specific field sobriety tests and he had not done that.
Results, and it was different to where they had to pull all that officer's cases. And I remember they opened up a courtroom and called back all his cases to see whether that may have been a case in all these cases. And the deals started getting made and disrupted. And
did that officer get fired?
Yes, he did.
As well, he should have.
Yeah.
As well, he should
Absolutely.
have. I would again remind any viewers that if you want to call in, if you're not able to put questions in the chat, you can reach us at 916-384-8204. Courtside is here to answer your questions.
There is something to be said for passionate restraint, right? Where you may have the passion to do something, but you've got to restrain yourself in order to be clear and calm and explain what is going on, and also to be able to act and not react. Passionate restraint. We have to start learning that, and here's a great analogy that I heard from someone, is that, you hear that thing, you can lead a horse to water, right? But you can't make him drink. Well, here's the twist on that. The horse doesn't know that the horse is thirsty. So the first thing you got to do is you got to show the horse that water is good. So you have to take a handful of water and bring it to the horse and allow the horse to see that water is good. And then the horse, after knowing that the water is good, will put you on his back and take you to that water. But if they don't ever know that the water is good for them, then they don't move. So is it that, we got to know and we got to thirst that, hey, something is good for us. We've got to dip ourselves into the water. We got to know that, wow, that's good. And our thirst will lead us then to act and react in a proper way.
And if we don't, based on what we see with the laws that are being put forth right now, we will be steamrolled over.
Yes.
And we don't want that to happen.
Reversal of history, as they say, I don't think you can ever repeat, but yet you can continue to suffer from laws that do not favor your kind, your mentality, the way you view society. Because sometimes it isn't a white and black thing. Sometimes it is not a colored thing. Because politics itself can be deadly if you don't know how to play in it. And so, because politics is all about who rules you, who rules who.
Who makes the laws.
That's right. That rule you. And you got a good leader, right? Great. But then again, that power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. And that never fails. So your best leaders are ones who know to lead and then get out of the way.
And that's why we have to have a system of checks and balances. Right. And we need to have accountability. We have accountability in everything else that we do. Yes. We need accountability for officers. Officers shouldn't feel like they can engage in this kind of behavior and get away with it.
Right.
A person who commits a crime isn't allowed to get away with it. And officers committing their crimes, these crimes that we have been discussing here on courtside all these weeks, they should not be allowed to get away with it. Right. And the conviction of just one, Derek Chauvin, does not make up for all of the incidents that have happened. And we only hear about the ones that make it into national news, right? But we know that there's so many others because the incident where Daryl Chauvin had done similar conduct, pinning a 14-year-old boy down to the ground for over 17 minutes, that never made the news, never heard about it until now after the George Floyd trial. So we have to know that it wasn't just those two. Right. Who knows how many people Chauvin did that to? And not just Chauvin, other bad officers.
Because, and I think I just wrote it down, there's an article that came out about how cop shuffling.
Oh,
you know?
Yes, you did.
How, I'm a bad cop here, and they don't fire me necessarily, but you maybe let me resign. And I'm going to go right over to the next county or the next town, and I'm going to apply, and I'm going to get that job, and I may then again keep up my behavior.
If you guys want to look the article up, it was ABC News. It was wandering cops shuffle departments abusing citizens.
Right.
And basically, as Lawman said, maybe they don't get fired. Or sometimes they do get fired.
Sure.
And they just move to a different department. They move to a different jurisdiction, and they're hired at that other department. Right. We need to put a stop to that as well.
Right.
Because even if I had a job as a bus driver and I had just accident after accident with my bus, and then I left Sacramento and was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna go a few towns over and I'm gonna drive the bus in Oakland. Oakland's gonna check my record here in Sacramento and say, no, ma'am, no, thank you. You will not be allowed to drive our buses. And we need that same thing happening with officers. They should not be allowed to resign and then go to some other department. Guess what? If you are mistreating the citizens you are supposed to protect, you no longer get to be an officer anywhere. Doesn't that apply with teachers?
Yes.
If there is a teacher,
that's right,
who
use a child or
who
something?
has abused a child and is no longer allowed to teach, Should they be allowed to just move to a different jurisdiction
right.
and teach in that jurisdiction?
How
It
about-
should be
yeah.
statewide. Like this,
Yes,
the
it should be a database.
teachers
basically.
are licensed
Yes.
statewide.
Right.
Or there should be some statewide licensing
That's right.
for officers.
Here's the bad part is, think of this example. You work at Walmart and you steal something and they fire you. Now, go get another job doing some teller work or working with cash.
That's not going to
So,
happen.
yeah.
Not unless
So-
you somehow are able to conceal your identity, or your friend is the manager at Walmart. And so when they call, the friend says, well, I'm not going to tell them that she was a thief.
But imagine the person who suffers even from that. And let's say you stole because you needed food or you needed an item or something. So that's why you stole.
Not just for the sake of
Right,
doing
of
violence
steal, right.
for its very nature.
And it will be difficult to then get another job.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
they will judge you based on that theft.
And so you may have to get a job in a field that you don't want to be
That's
in,
right.
right? You might have to get a job, working fast food, because that's what you have to do to take care of your family. We're not disparaging that at all. Get whatever job you can that allows you to take care of your family. We do that, and officers should do that. So guess what? You can no longer be an officer, but there are other jobs out there that you can go and do. None that involve the public trust, because you've shown us that you can't be trusted.
Right. And so it's all, I mean, we put a lot of power in officers. We give them a lot of power. I mean, they carry firearms. They carry not only firearms, but look at their vests. I mean, they have the mace, they have tasers, they have things on them that can put people down. And we trust that they're going to exercise the proper judgment when doing so. Just like when you hire any worker and they steal from you, you are hoping that they're going to exercise the kind of judgment that's not going to be harmful to you. But how do you punish the worker versus the cop? And do we do it equally? Nope, because we put the cops on high.
And I would say that in some communities, they are advocating for, and I believe this may be in Portland or Seattle, that when there are certain interactions, there is someone else that you call other than law enforcement.
True.
So,
Like
because we know
stops. Some places, traffic stops.
we know that there are have been a number of cases where a family member has called for help with someone that has known mental issues,
yes.
and law enforcement comes out, and next thing we know, they
Somebody's
have
dead.
killed that person.
That's right.
Now somebody's dead. They didn't
Right.
just die. Law enforcement has killed that person. And so we need to establish other organizations that where someone can respond, or a group of people can respond, who can deal with someone that's having a mental health crisis. Because law enforcement clearly has shown us they are not equipped to deal with
That's
that.
right.
They deal with a mental health crisis with force, and by basically suffocating the
Same
person and
demands.
preventing them from
Right.
from breathing. And they're not going to.
Causing fear.
Yes.
Fear that you're causing someone.
Yes.
I remember when the Clark issue occurred, the mayor and a lot of health professionals got together to try to bring such a force together, or dream up some kind of mental health response to situations. And it would be just that not only, I mean, you can, if it's a mental illness crisis, they respond. There is a place that is doing that. I just can't remember now, but you're right. I think it's Pacific Northwest, where if it's clearly a mental health crisis, they send out 2 or 3 workers.
Yes. Who are, I think
Yeah.
one is a trained nurse, the other person is a social worker,
Right.
because these people have the specific training to
Recognize.
yes, and to handle the situation in a way that doesn't involve violence. And I
Right.
believe that they are set up such that if the situation
Yeah.
they have misjudged and the person does become violent, then they retreat and then they engage law
Exactly.
enforcement. But they don't bring in law enforcement in the beginning to
Right.
deal with a situation that can easily be de-escalated
Yes.
with the right words.
Right. I mean, that just harkens back to remember our guy who crossed the street, I'm Jaywalker, not Jaywalker.
One that we
down
talked about early on in Southern
where
California.
the cops are deciding whether he was jaywalking.
It sounds like they weren't even
you know.
sure he was committing a crime.
Even in that, I mean,
and again, they knew him.
Right.
They knew that he had mental health issues,
Yeah.
and they still treated him in that
right.
fashion.
And it's not
we
even
can't,
yeah.
as a public, continue to allow people to be mistreated in this way. If we want this country to live up to the ideals that we claim, right?
Right.
Those can't just be theories.
And the sad part about that is just what you said. If we want this country to live up to that, because maybe there's a group and a faction in places who don't want that. And that's when we start living, it's sad. And we have to face that, though. That's something we've got to look at. You got to look yourself in the mirror, right? And say, what do you want? How do you want to be governed? And governed comes down to,
again,
voting. Participating.
Voting, not just in addition to voting, being actively involved. Right. If your legislators have never heard from you, they have no idea what policies you support. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call their office. They work for you. Correct. Their pay comes from your tax dollars. Right. It is absolutely fine to call them with questions. What bills have you put forth?
Right.
What bills are on the table? What bills are before your committee that you're going to be voting on?
And which ones do you support and not support? And if you find a candidate, if you find people that you promote or that you love, or, not love, but I mean, you love their policies, that you want to promote their policies, getting active also means getting out on the street and working for them, promoting them, and helping them along the way. So, being active politically can never be wrong. I mean, we live in a state. We live in a state, meaning a country. We live in this country where politics is king. Everybody who gets into office has to run for it, which means people must vote me in. And if they must vote me in, I've got to educate them on what I do, what I won't do, and then gain your vote. And I gain it through trust and confidence that I will speak for you. And identifying the people who will speak for you is key. And also identifying the people who won't speak for you is key.
That is correct.
Being active is sometimes merely reading, reading up on the individual, 2 or 3 pages about them.
Yes.
So that's even active, because at least you care. How many times do you get these voter books? How many times you get those books and they're explaining these propositions and these people and things like that and their positions, and you throw it away? You get rid of it. Realize they give it to you because they have to try to educate you. That's why we receive those things.
But let me just say this, those booklets don't tell the entire story.
No.
Now, we live in an age that our parents didn't live in, right?
Google.
You young people, you got Google. You can Google anything. Now, everything on the internet is not necessarily correct, but that can be the start of your research.
Now, those books, though, even though you say that, Carmen, they at least have to be giving everybody has an opportunity to put out what it is about them. It's not somebody else commenting on it.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
but I'm just saying it doesn't tell the whole story. It's a short synopsis, but you can do the additional research. If you hop on Google to find the latest
there's a bill on
whatever video that you want to watch and listen to. You can do that same thing for finding out about people who are running for political office, for finding about people who are already in political office.
Definitely.
You're not going to believe this, Mr. Staten, but I just looked at the clock and we have actually gone over.
We
have gone over. I try to stop us.
I know, but we have to, sometimes things bubble up, things happen, 1 hour's not enough. It really isn't to talk about these issues,
It isn't, but we appreciate everyone
Yes.
that takes the time to spend their evening listening to
Yes.
Courtside. And even if you can't do it at the time
Right.
during which we're live,
Go back
you
and
can go
listen.
back
Yes.
and listen to it later. Again, also you can call in, and you don't have to just wait until we're live. If you want to call in, you can call in during the week. We have a voicemail. Leave us a message. We'll get back to you, or we'll answer your question live on air.
Tell us
That
what you
number
wanna hear.
again is 916-384-8204. If you have topics that you want us to address, let us know that. Let us know that. I
you got
am
there?
going to read.
Ah,
This was a post by one of our Facebook friends. And let me get back here. This is Mr. Jonathan Coleman. And this was a post that he had put up. And it says, our greatest power over Blacks is that
Yes.
we control everything they believe. We control their education, their news media, their entertainment, all their statistics, and even their image of themselves.
Right.
This, therefore, allows us to inundate Blacks with disinformation designed to instill the myth of white superiority and Black self-hatred into their minds. It is a psychological warfare program used for protecting our white dominance. What do you think about that, Lawman?
I say he speaks the truth. I know he speaks the truth because that's just in line with Ehrlichman and the Nixon administration and their game plan to take over, so to speak, about how they're going to throw drugs and turmoil into our communities. And that way they can discredit our leaders.
And now we can see it, right? We're at a place where we can see it. How can we continue to let it happen?
Right. And that's what they bank on. That's what they bank on.
And so they will make millionaires out of someone who is putting information out that encourages us hating each other. Someone from Oak Park hating on someone who was from Meadowview, and neither one of them owns anything there. And then results in young people taking guns and shooting and killing each other. Yes. And they call that two birds with one stone, because one is going to go to prison potentially for the rest of his life, and the other one, his family will have to visit him in the graveyard.
And the children.
We have to stop this. We have to stop this.
True. And seeing it is the first step. Seeing it, knowing that it's there is the first step.
Yes, it is.
And then
refusing to participate.
Yes.
Stop hating a man because he lives on the other side of town. He has done nothing to you. He doesn't own that side of town. He probably doesn't even own the house that he lives in. He has done nothing to you. Stop hating your brother, because he is your brother and you are your brother's
keeper. And I'll tell you this, we probably have to use this as a platform for our next topic about our hatred of ourselves, how we turn around and love each other, looking at what we're fighting against. Because remember, the key word there was a psychological warfare. You see?
If they make you believe that all you can ever be is a rapper. Now, we're not saying there's nothing wrong with being a rapper.
Right.
Not at all. But if they make you believe that that's all you can be, then where will we get dentists from?
Scientists.
Where will we get doctors from? Where will we get scientists from?
Right. So
where will we get policemen from?
And I'll tell you, we see it happening in Indian community, Asian community. They come here and they see education is everything. They push their kid. You're going to be a doctor. You're going to be a dentist. You're going to be a lawyer.
Now, I will differentiate
them they from come us here. I understand.
Because they have not had the history that we have had in this country.
But they see that this psychological thing, I believe they see, that stuff is working, which is when against us.
It is working against us.
So they know,
and so they join in with the rest of society, in that, in treating us this way. We must start to control our own storyline, our own destiny.
Right.
And it can't be one of hatred against someone that looks just like you and has done nothing to
I
you.
think we should talk about this next time. You know, I mean, I really think we should dig deep.
Well, you know what?
Have a crying session, whatever it's going to take.
Next week's topic, we can talk about related to the criminal justice system, because we try and always and combine the topic with the relevance to the criminal justice system. So next week we will talk about gangs, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that it's not illegal. It is not illegal to be a gang member. But we're going to talk with you about how that membership is used.
Exactly.
To send people to prison for years. We are going to say good night tonight, unless Mr. Lawman has something else. We're going to say good night. We're going to thank everyone that was here with us live tonight and let you know we will be back here. We appreciate you. We will be back here next Friday, 6 p.m.
Yes.
All right. Good night.
Good night.